When India became politically independent, a telephone was a luxury. 6 decades later, there has been a dramatic transformation. Telephones are with all sections of people in the remotest corners of the country. In 1994, the Government of India gave up its monopoly over the telecommunications sector by allowing private operators to provide phone services as part of the process of economic liberalization.
Now pick it up, pick it up.
The arrival of cellular telephony was to radically change the way Indians communicated with one another. The first decade of the new millennium saw exponential growth in the use of mobile phones. Today, for every 10 Indians, there are 7 phones. 1 in 4 people have a phone in rural India. In most parts of urban India, there are more phones than human beings. The telecom business was always lucrative and became even more so as India's market became the second largest in the world. But the playing field was far from level.
Get idea.
Though dozens of firms entered the market, only a small clutch of companies were privileged, and some benefited greatly from government policies. The other side of economic liberalization has been crony capitalism at its worst. Here is the story of the ugly underbelly of the great Indian telecom revolution, the biggest scandal in independent India and perhaps even the world. The first major controversy broke out in 1994 when Sukram was the Union Minister for Telecommunications in the P.V. Narasimha Rao government. He was accused of favouring select companies with contracts and licenses. In August 1996, the Central Bureau of Investigation recovered over 3.5 crore rupees from his residences in Delhi and Himachal Pradesh. He made it to the Guinness Book of World Records for the wrong reasons. He was arrested 13 years later and spent a few weeks behind bars. Despite Sukram's ignominious exit, many of his successors continued to follow the scent of money. The next major controversy took place during the Bharatiya Janata Party-led National Democratic Alliance regime when there was a quick succession of telecom ministers. When Jagmohan refused to play ball and shift official policy from a licensing system to one entailing sharing of revenues, he was replaced by Sushma Swaraj, who was followed by Ramvilas Paswan, Pramod Mahajan and Arun Shourie. Objections were raised in Parliament over these policy changes, which were also criticized by the official watchdog of public finances, the Controller and Auditor General of India.
फोन और घर के फोन में फर्क है। फोन तो हर घर में होता था, पर उसकी एक परमानेंट जगह होती थी।
In 2001, basic telecom service providers were allowed to provide what was called limited mobility. This meant that consumers could use their fixed landlines in a wireless mode within a certain geographical area using CDMA or Code Division Multiple Access technology.
टाटा वॉकी, घर का फोन।
This was opposed by operators deploying the competing GSM or Global System of Mobile Communications Technology, who described the move as a backdoor entry by CDMA operators like Tata Teleservices and Reliance Communications. The GSM operators were miffed since they had shelled out large amounts for their licenses. The courts were clogged with litigation. In 2003, the government allowed limited mobility to become full mobility under the UASL or Unified Access Services licenses. Companies in the Reliance and Tata groups made significant financial gains thanks to this policy change. Reliance Communications was allowed to migrate to a full mobility regime by paying interest of 485 crore rupees as penalty. The gold rush had begun. Nearly 2 million new mobile connections were added each and every month. But the controversies of the past faded into insignificance with what was to take place: the greatest theft of public money in India, the misallocation and undervaluation of second generation or 2G spectrum between September 2007 and January 2008. On the 10th of January 2008, 121 new mobile telecom licenses were issued on a single day. That too, using a dubious first-come, first-served system that is used for selling cinema tickets. What really happened that afternoon? The Controller and Auditor General of India, or CAG, did a review of the allocation procedure and found out how the then Communications Minister Andimuthu Raja manipulated even the dubious first-come, first-served system. Raja selectively cherry-picked one of the many recommendations made by the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India and implemented it, overruling the Prime Minister's advice to auction the spectrum in a transparent fashion. His move was objected to by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Law as well, but he went on regardless, ignoring their suggestions. Later, under fire, Raja insisted he did not break any rules and that he was only going by past precedents.
No, the question does not arise. The question does not arise. We will prove that everything has been done in accordance with the law.
So you will not resign. You are saying you will not resign.
Please, when the government moved in the year 1999, under the guise of the National Telecom Policy 99, from action route to revenue route, the first CAG report thereafter was laid in the Parliament in the year 2001, which categorically says it's a huge exchequer loss, undue hasty decision, and leads to fraud. The report is still pending in the Parliament. No decision was taken by PSC. Thereafter, the NTP 19 was carried out by all my predecessors. That has been done by my also.
He claimed he had broken a cartel of operators that had monopolized the mobile telecom industry. He brought in a few companies he knew in his earlier avatar as Minister of State for Environment and Forests. Companies like those in the Unitech and DB Realty groups that had experience in real estate but none in telecom. There were several serious discrepancies in the processes followed to allot licenses. The last date of submission of applications was arbitrarily changed from the 1st of October 2007 to the 25th of September to cap the number of applications in violation of the recommendations of the Telecom Regulatory Authority. Then, on the 10th of January 2008, all applications between March 2006 and September 2007 were allotted licenses on the same day, violating even the questionable first-come, first-served policy. In this chaos that prevailed, 85 applications were accepted, even though these were incomplete and ineligible because facts had been suppressed and fictitious documents submitted. Some had even jumped the queue since they had prior information about the cutoff date. Several applicants who were awarded licenses, such as Swan Telecom and real estate companies with no experience in telecom, were partly owned by existing telecom operators, which made them ineligible because of conflicts of interest. 110 applications were rejected, while 85 applications were considered ineligible by the CAG. One applicant company, Estel, made an offer to pay the Department of Telecommunications market prices for spectrum, which were many times higher than the license amount. But the government rejected this offer to increase its earnings.
All of us who know telecom know that spectrum is limited, and the TRAI, who is the regulator,
The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India.
always says that the need and timing for new entrants is entirely dependent on spectrum availability. That is the main thing that determines your policy direction. You have a scarce and a precious resource, and you had multiple license applications building up. So we were writing again and again, so many licenses, now they're 200, now they're 300, 575 license applications, pointing to this gold rush, pointing to the fact right from the start.
What you're saying is by that time, the Indian telecom market had started booming, and I mean, the market was really exponentially expanding. And this resource became really scarce because it's finite. So, and when you saw this rush for licenses, that's where you sensed that something was not exactly above board.
Right. We sensed that there was no effort to revisit the pricing. We could sense that the fact that everybody was onto something big meant that, things would go their way. And that was the most interesting. I mean, the flavor of the stories, the flavor of the headlines, I mean, that itself would have set anybody's antennas up if anybody was watching or anybody cared. It was very sinister, and you'd appreciate that, payments are made, the checks have to be prepared circle by circle. So there are 22 telecom circles.
So if you're applying for
each
22
applicant,
of them, you have to have 22 separate demand drafts.
22 demand drafts, 22 performance bank guarantees, and
yes, separate
22
sets of-
financial bank guarantees,
correct.
which means 66 checks. And no bank is going in that to you within
In 45
hours.
minutes. Certainly not for the amounts involved.
So
That
this
huge
is like
amounts of money.
premeditated, pre-motivated, murder.
Why? I mean, how could he do this? I mean, he says that in order to avoid legal implications. Now, what were these legal implications?
This is in fact, this is the whole problem with this case, that whether it's the Attorney General or the Solicitor General or whatever law officers, these people are giving this kind of mumbo jumbo, which doesn't mean anything. Firstly, even before the window was open, the government had enough licenses out there. I mean, enough applications out there. Plus, the older lot, the existing companies, were supposed to get their spectrum, as per that the subscriber link policy. So there was enough demand for spectrum, which the government could barely meet from what it had. So one, you didn't need to open the window at all, the way Mr. Raja did. Secondly, it's very clear that even by September itself, he had enough licenses out there. He had enough applications out there. So this is just stuff which these people are making up as they go along. Now the justification they give is that the reason why we put that cutoff date was because we had enough people.
Because there were so many applications.
So if you knew that, then you should just had a cutoff date even earlier. Why do you have this 15th thing, and why do you make it then October 1st? So the whole thing is just post facto justification that's going on. It's completely irrelevant. It's mumbo jumbo.
The 2G spectrum licenses were valued at 2001 prices, at least 1/6 the prevailing market rates. The Department of Telecommunications under Raja deliberately failed to maximize revenues from the sale of a finite and hence scarce and precious national resource that belongs to the people of India. Companies which got licenses like Swan Telecom and Unitech expanded their equity share capital and sold stakes to multinational telecom giants like the Dubai-based Etelisat and the Norwegian Telenor at prices that were 7 times higher than had been paid to the Indian government. Tata Teleservices too obtained a bonanza from Japan's Docomo. When the Department of Telecommunications publicly auctioned third generation or 3G spectrum and spectrum used for broadband wireless access between April and June 2010, it earned over 100,000 crore rupees. Putting these pieces together, the CAG came to the conclusion that the Government of India had lost a huge sum of 176,000 crore rupees because of the scandalous manner in which 2G spectrum was allocated and valued, an amount that is nearly 40 billion US dollars, making it the biggest scam of its kind anywhere in the world.
हमने किसी को क्लीन चिट नहीं दी है, जो रिकॉर्ड से हमारे सामने आया है बस वही लिख दिया है. 3 scenarios which benchmark the actual existing situations at that time. You can either accept it or reject it or select a 4th scenario. The only thing we are saying is this is a presumptive loss we have worked out with reference to these 3 scenarios. There is a loss that cannot be denied. We have said that the DOT has not exercised due diligence. Had they done it, maybe they would not have found them eligible at that point of time.
Gold is gold. Whether you make a bracelet out of it, a phone out of it, or earrings out of it. You don't price gold differently if a poor man is buying a gold or a rich man is buying a gold. There's no poor man's gold or a rich man's gold. Spectrum is spectrum is spectrum is spectrum. Spectrum is finite, spectrum is valuable. This 2G, 3G classification is an afterthought. It's a made-up argument. It's not a tenable argument to say that spectrum that is being given away for 1,500 crores is less valuable than spectrum that is being given away for 10,000 crores. It is the same value. If you run a program where you're giving away gold at 1/10 its price at the bottom hall of a government or department office in Delhi, you will get a stampede, which is exactly what happened in 2008. Everybody and his uncle in India knew that spectrum was being given away for 1,500 crores, and everybody knew that that spectrum was worth 8,000 crores minimum. Of course, you would have people in real estate, you would have people in XYZ sectors completely unrelated to telecom queuing up because it is an economic arbitrage opportunity. By any arithmetic, the loss to the government is huge. A. B. Look at the opportunities that we could have had as a government if that money was available with us. Less borrowings, we could have invested that money in, instead of borrowing as the government is doing 6 lakh crores, to fund its fiscal deficit.
Infrastructure, your healthcare, education, bijli, sadak,
1 lakh crores is a lot of money that the government could have used in productive ways in its national right to education, in terms of right to work. All of these big programs of social spending could have been funded in a financially prudent manner instead of having to borrow. So the numbers are not relevant. The 3G auctions have revealed without a doubt that there has been a significant swindle on the government of India on the issue of spectrum. Up to this time, all my letters and all our debates in Parliament was all about notional losses.
But now you're saying the loss is real.
Now you just have to look at 3G spectrum and say, look, this is what the spectrum is valued. This gold that you were giving away all this while from 2006 onwards, we've been arguing in Parliament that this is being priced cheap. You came back and said, no, this is not cheap, this is good, this is affordability, blah, 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 blah. Now you have a proof there that investors are willing to pay 10,000 crores for what you've been giving away at 1,500 crores.
For 3 years, the Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, remained silent. Even though a section of the media continued to report on the gross violations of rules, no action was taken till a public interest litigation was filed in the Supreme Court of India, urging the highest court of the country to monitor the CBI's investigations that had begun more than a year earlier. The court upheld the plea of the petitioners and started cracking the whip on the CBI.
Dual policy allotment to Ratan Tata and Reliance was the entire media organization were forced to keep quiet because nobody reported. That gave courage to Raja to go ahead on 2G spectrum scam.
Mr. Raja? Yes? Neera.
The scam was now out in the
I
open.
sent you an SMS. No,
The corrupt nexus between politicians and corporate captains was revealed as phone conversations recorded between lobbyist Neera Radia and a host of important individuals were placed in the public domain. The conversations, which were legally recorded by the income tax authorities and leaked to the media, also revealed a questionable role played by a few high-profile media personalities in influencing the appointment of Raja as Telecom Minister for a second term in May 2009.
Hello?
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. The Congress ने तो statement thank God issue कर दिया है. बरखा ने कल करवा लिया उससे statement. Okay, it's not about individuals. It's about it's not about.
हाँ वो तो मैंने देख लिया उसमें आ गया ना उसमें अभी आ रहा था उसको मनीष तिवारी का.
In November 2007, handwritten letter from industrialist Ratan Tata to Tamil Nadu Chief Minister Karunanidhi praising Raja became public. After this letter, the Tata Group company's application for dual technology GSM spectrum was accepted by the government, enabling the company to obtain spectrum by jumping the queue ahead of 343 waiting applicants, further distorting the already distorted first come, first served system. 2 years later, in a television interview, Ratan Tata wondered if India had become a banana republic. He told New Delhi Television on the 29th of November 2010 that he regretted being in the telecom business. The nation was outraged. The cancer of corruption had eroded every pillar of democracy. The government was fighting with its back to the wall.
Well, let me first deal with what I said to Mr. Raja in a letter that I wrote to him on the 2nd of November 2007. I mentioned in that letter number of concerns which were being expressed, some in the press, some telecom companies used to come and mention them to me. And I listed a number of issues and I said to him that you must look into these issues and ensure that they are dealt with in a fair and equitable, transparent manner. One of the issues I had asked him to look into was the possibility from legal and technical angle of having an auction of spectrum. Mr. Raja wrote back to me almost on the same day, our letters crossed, and he said, I have been absolutely transparent in my dealings. I will be so in the future, and that you have my assurance that I have done nothing and I will do nothing which will not be consistent with the promise that I am making. Now, as far as auction is concerned, he came back to me and he said, auction is something which has not been suggested by TRI. Also not suggested by the Telecom Commission. And he also said that if we have auction, it would not give a level playing field for the newcomers because the existing players have got their spectrum free of charge until 10 point something megahertz. And therefore, he said, the TRI's advice, the Telecom Commission's advice, and his own view was that auctions are not the way forward, at least for 2G spectrum, And he also mentioned in a subsequent letter that he is agreeable to auction 3G spectrum. But with regard to 2G spectrum, he was very clear that we should stay with the then existing approach. And this was also discussed with the finance ministry, because in terms of the cabinet decision of 2003, the pricing and allocation of spectrum was to be settled between the Ministry of Finance and the Telecom department. Initially, of course, the Finance Ministry did ask for a high price of spectrum, but after many discussions, I think the two ministries agreed that as far as 2G is concerned, we have to live with the present system, particularly with regard to the amount of spectrum that is built and embedded into a license agreement. So this is the background why I did not proceed further with this matter of pricing of spectrum, because if the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Telecom both agree, and they have the obligation in terms of the cabinet decision of 2003 to decide that matter, and also since TRAI is a expert body, Telecom Commission has experts. If all of them were of the same view, I did not feel I was in a position to insist that auctions must be insisted.
If I may just, can I just follow up?
Yes.
Because the other part of the question was the sale of the these companies, this spectrum to companies soon after, even before rollout. So there was a huge sum of money there sitting there, and the scam was staring at everybody in the face.
Well, I do not know, frankly speaking, what was the motivation of people who got spectrum. But I know that as far as the basic policy is concerned, that I thought was, as it was then the prevailing practice, and Raja was continuing that policy, that as far as the who gets license, the first come first served policy, how it is implemented, that was never discussed with me. Licenses were not a matter which ever got referred to me or to the cabinet. That was a decision exclusively of the Telecom minister. Now, subsequent events have shown that people to companies sold their equity, but I was told that they have not sold it to shareholders, they have sold it in a manner to dilute the equity of the promoters. Now, if they have to roll out, they require money. And that money can be raised either by way of borrowings or by way of diluting equity, getting more people. And therefore, at that stage, I did not think that I should intervene in that affair.
The Prime Minister compared the throwaway price at which 2G spectrum was allocated to subsidies on food, fertilizers, and kerosene.
Obviously, I think if these events have taken place, I think they do bring out the weaknesses in processes of governance, or you may call them ethical deficit. I think I don't deny that we need to improve, I think, the quality of governance. That's not subject which divides me and other members of the cabinet. Now, with regard to the loss of revenues, it is very much dependent on what is your starting point. There are various estimates. But you have to assess what is the right magnitude after asking yourself what was the right price. Now, I have explained to you that the then existing policy of the government was that auctions should not take place. And if auctions are not taking place, then what is the basis for you to calculate the loss? I am not in a position to say that there is a foolproof method in which one can determine the extent of the loss. I think it's very much a function of what is your starting point, and also depends upon an opinion. We have, for example, a budget which gives the subsidy for the food 80,000 crores per annum. Some people may say these food grains should be sold at market prices. So will we say then, because they are not sold at market prices, because you are giving them subsidy, there's a loss of 80,000 crores. We give subsidy to fertilizers, which cost about 60,000 crores every year. People can say that this fertilizer should be priced at the market rate. So would you then say that there is a loss of revenue of 60,000 crores in fertilizer sales? We subsidize the price of kerosene to an extent, I think, which is greater than many other subsidies. That imposes burden on our oil marketing companies. Should we say then that because we give subsidies for kerosene sales under public distribution, that there is a loss of revenue? So
Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, are you disagreeing with what the CAG said, or are you agreeing with, sir, what your telecom minister said of a zero revenue loss versus a 1,70,000
Well, I
crore
think the CAG himself has said this is a presumptive loss, and therefore it depends upon which, I think, assumptions you make.
Newly appointed Telecom Minister Kapil Sibal, who had taken over from Raja, even claimed there was no loss to the exchequer, completely contradicting what the CBI director had told the Supreme Court as well as the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament.
We have no problem in the Supreme Court monitoring directly what the CBI is saying, so that the people of this country know that all this is being done in a transparent fashion and that the government is not involved at all. All the policy framework and all the migration from the then telecom operators to the revenue sharing regime took place at the instance of the BJP. What happened at that time was public knowledge even then, and of course public memory is rather short, so log bhul bhi jate hain.
The opposition parties only want to do politics. They don't want to punish the guilty, because if you go into depth of it, Mr. Raja has only implemented the policy framed by Mr. Pramod Mahajan, Mr. Arun Shourie, and confirmed by Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee.
The Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, or DMK, led by Tamil Nadu Chief Minister Karunanidhi, kept saying Raja had done no wrong and that he was being targeted because he was a low-caste Dalit. Raja claimed he had done all that he had with the full knowledge and concurrence of the Prime Minister. But the opposition, armed with ample ammunition, went on an offensive. The winter session of Parliament in 2010 was completely paralysed because the government refused to accept the demand to set up a joint parliamentary committee to investigate the scandal.
The point is, how could such a big loot of public money, in utter violation of all the official notings, the guidelines, continue to be made effective with no checkup in spite of repeated protest inside the parliament and also by the media? Therefore, we would like prompt criminal investigation, punishment of all those guilty, and I regret to say Congress track record in bailing out those who are significant is too notorious.
BJP demands unequivocally that Raja must be dismissed forthwith, despite the threats from DMK. It is the issue of probity. It is the issue of principles. And now Congress is on the test whether they stand to the test of principles or not. First, as Raja says always that he has sought permission of the Prime Minister. So let Prime Minister clarify whether he has given permission to allot 2G spectrum without auction. Our second question to the Prime Minister is whether the decision to allot the 2G spectrum without auction is that of the Cabinet or that of the Department of Telecom.
As pressure built up, the Congress began to relent and back down.
There have been some allegations. Based on the allegations, the appropriate investigating agencies are doing their job of identifying if any wrongdoing has taken place. Investigations are ongoing. If and when there is a discovery of any misgovernance or misconduct, and it's proven that there was indeed some misconduct and misappropriation, then appropriate action will be taken.
In an attempt to salvage the situation that was careening out of control and bowing to public anger, on the 14th of November 2010, the government asked Raja to resign. He did so rather reluctantly. 2 days later, the damning indictment of the functioning of the Department of Telecommunications under Raja by the Controller and Auditor General of India was tabled in Parliament.
According to my leader's advice, in order to avoid the embarrassing situation to the government and the running system of the Parliament, leader advised me to tender resignation to the Honorable Prime Minister. In accordance with the advice that has been given to me by my respected and beloved leader, Dr. Kalaignar, I tendered the resignation to the Prime Minister. That does not mean I am accepting everything. I will leader, Dr. Kalaignar, I tendered the resignation to the Prime Minister. That does not mean I am accepting everything. I will prove that I did everything in accordance with the law. I wanted to send a message to the people that, as I promised earlier inside the house and outside the house, I did a revolution in telecom sector. When I assumed charge, the total telephone connection existed in India was only 300 million. Out of my efforts and endeavor, today the tele-density, total telephone connections is 729 million. I am committed for people, committed for country according to my advice given by my leader. I will prove my conscience is very clear. I am very satisfied. I did much to the people, to the country, to my party, to the nation.
What is mobile number? What is your smile number? Can we have private party? What is your private number?
On the 2nd of February 2011, Raja was finally behind bars. His aides, R.K. Chandolia, and the former Telecom Secretary Siddharth Behura were also arrested and sent to Delhi's Tihar jail. Promoters of companies like Swan Telecom, Shahid Usman Balwa, and Raja's close associate Sadiq Bacha were brought in for questioning. Organizations associated with the DMK, such as Sun TV, and non-government organizations like Tamil Mayam were raided in search of evidence. Anil Ambani, one of India's wealthiest men, was also questioned by the CBI. The CBI also questioned the government's senior-most law officer, Attorney General Ghulam E. Vahanvati, who allegedly gave a written opinion as Solicitor General of India approving the first-come, first-served system on the 7th of January 2008, 3 days before licenses were issued. which was used by Raja to overrule the objections of the Finance Ministry and the Law Ministry. The Attorney General later alleged that a part of the written opinion had been forged. Meanwhile, Telecom Minister Kapil Sibal swiftly tried to set his government's battered house in order.
The ministry has decided to set up a one-man committee comprising of a retired judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Shivraj B. Patil, to examine the appropriateness of procedures by the Department of Telecommunications in the issuance of licenses and allocation of spectrum during the period 2001 to 2009. One, there is the issue of criminal culpability. That is going to be taken care of by Supreme Court, because hopefully Supreme Court will monitor the CBI, right? So that takes care of who got benefits, who didn't got benefits, and wrongdoing. On the administrative side, whether procedures were violated or not, this will take care of it.
He also issued show-cause notices to companies, asking them to explain why their licenses should not be cancelled.
As we look into the future, this is what we promise the people of India: transparency, justice and equity, and to ensure that the sector has stability and realizes its enormous potential.
But there are few who are willing to buy this line. Almost everyone agrees that it isn't only Raja who flouted the rules, that there was collusion among important politicians, bureaucrats, and business tycoons. The rot went right up to the top. Questions were raised. Did the Prime Minister not know exactly what was going on, but chose not to do anything?
Now, coming to this correspondence, these are all very much in the public domain. There is a series of correspondence beginning November 2, where Mr. Raja writes to the Prime Minister. Again, the Prime Minister writes back to Mr. Raja on November 2 itself. Mr. Raja again writes back to the Prime Minister on November 2. Then there is a lull. On 26 December 2007, Mr. Raja writes to the Prime Minister stating this as reference to the discussions I had with you and with the External Affairs Minister. At that time it was Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, and states that what he proposes to do in terms of spectrum allocation. All these things receive a curt one-sentence terse reply from the Prime Minister stating that I am in receipt of your letter. Mr. Raja interprets this as a green signal from the Prime Minister, no less, and proceeds on to create the harakiri that he does on 10th January 2008. So the long and short of my submission is the Prime Minister was very much aware, not only retrospectively, after the event, but prospectively, even before the event was to take place, that there is something of a tsunami that's going to hit the Indian telecom sector. He could have jolly well prevented. I don't know why he didn't prevent it. Perhaps it is coalition compulsions or perhaps something more. I don't know. But all these things make the Congress party and the DMK partners in this particular scam.
Despite claims to the contrary, the evidence suggests that the Prime Minister knew about the first-come, first-served policy and agreed to its implementation. Along with the Department of Telecommunications, the other key agency that has come under intense fire is the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, or TRAI. Meant to oversee the working of this sector, the regulator, more often than not, played the role of a passive observer. All the while that DOT was internally changing its policies, hardly any attempts were made by the TRAI to question these changes. At a media conference to clear the air, the Prime Minister himself admitted there were lapses, but that compromises had to be made to save the ruling coalition.
Mr. Raja being inducted into the cabinet, I cannot divulge what went on in the processes of cabinet formation, but I would like to mention that we are a coalition government. In a coalition government, you can suggest your preferences, but you have to go by what the leader of that particular coalition party ultimately insists. And Mr. Raja, along with Mr. Maran, was the choice of the DMK party. And as of that moment, I had no reason, frankly speaking, to feel that anything seriously wrong had been done. And therefore, I did not feel that I had the authority to object to Mr. Raja's entry, because I quite honestly, in May 2009, although complaints were coming in, but complaints were coming from all sides, and some were from those companies which had not benefited, some were from those who have benefited but not benefited adequately, and therefore I was not in a position to make up my mind that anything seriously was wrong with Mr. Raja's doing at that time.
Not good enough, say those tracking India's biggest scam. With elections round the corner in key states including Tamil Nadu, where Congress has a tie-up with the DMK, Raja's saga is bound to have an impact on the party's chances of making a comeback.
This is perhaps the only scam, to my knowledge, where two major parties have been actively conniving with each other, and both are at power at the center and share power at the state. And that's why this makes it a profound scam and of this magnitude. Naturally, the cover-up has been brilliant. If you look at it, the whole cover-up all across the last 3-4 years has muzzled the media, has literally smothered the bureaucracy, has not allowed things to come out in various sections, including the opposition was strangulated. So to my view, if you look at it from a holistic perspective, the only organ which seems to have acquitted and come out with flying colors seemed to be the Supreme Court. But for the Supreme Court, I shudder to think what would have happened to this case. And that is why both the parties which have actively connived at the center to this loot are now going to face the test at the Karma Bhumi, which is going to be Tamil Nadu. And should they succeed in the hustings, God forbid, I think that this is going to be a very big setback for fighting corruption in this country.
The government has accepted the opposition demand and set up a joint parliamentary committee to investigate the scandal. As the CBI's investigations carried on, several key political leaders like Raja's close associate, member of the Rajya Sabha and Karunanidhi's daughter Kanimoyi, was questioned, as was her stepmother Dayalu Ammal. Then came a bizarre twist to this labyrinthine tale of corruption. Sadiq Bacha, an associate of Raja, DB reality promoter Balwa and DMK bigwigs, was found hanging at his residence, apparently a case of suicide. Several questions remain unanswered. Despite knowing all the facts, why did the Prime Minister, successive Finance Ministers P. Chidambaram and Pranab Mukherjee and their officials not act? What was the role played by lobbyists like Neera Radia and retired bureaucrats like Pradeep Baijal in influencing the appointment of Raja as Telecom Minister for a second term? Were certain corporate captains victims of the 2G spectrum scam or active perpetrators? As the story unfolds, many unexpected twists and turns are likely to take place. What is clear is that the 2G spectrum scandal has shaken the nation. The wealth of the people of India has been looted while the public was kept in the dark because of collusion between politicians, businessmen, and government officials. Will they go unpunished? This is not the end.